Good evening, everybody. There was only one decent good evening out of this whole crowd, right up here in the front, and I'm giving him lots of credit for it, so you get credit. Let's do a little bit better. We're inside. It's raining outside, but we're inside, and there are snacks. This is good. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Yay! I am so glad you joined us for our next wonderful iteration of Sotterley Presents People in Perspectives. Let me just pull this because I'm too tall. I can't bend over like that. We have a lot of people. I know last time I checked, I think it was 85, and that was several days ago. We have a lot of people signed up online. So if you're joining us virtually, welcome. Please do know we'd love you to sign into the chat and let us know where you're joining us from tonight. And as we go through the evening, at the end, we will have Q&A. You'll be able to put your questions in. You can put them in at any time, but we want to invite you to take part. And at the end of the evening, when we're doing Q&A, I will run around and get questions from the audience. Ms. Katheryn Humphreys, who will be coming up in just a minute and doing introductions, she will be the person who will be monitoring the chat in the back and making sure that we get the questions up here. So our partner tonight, in fact, where did Miss Katheryn go? She's sneaky. She snuck up behind me. So if I didn't introduce myself, I apologize. I'm Nancy Easterling, the Executive Director of Historic Sotterley. And when we found, Katheryn and I were talking about all the presenters, she's like, you know, we've got to have. And I'm like, you're exactly right, Katheryn. So Katheryn Humphreys, our Interpretive Programs Manager, is now going to introduce our amazing event tonight. Ms. Katheryn.
See, you guys gave me a better introduction than Nancy got, so I feel special. I don't know why that is. That's just my luck. So again, my name is Katheryn Humphreys, and I'm the Interpretive Programs Manager here at Historic Sotterley. I would first be remiss if I didn't say that the support for this program for tonight's documentary viewing was made possible through the support for Serenity Farms and their family by University of New England, the Farm Heritage Conservancy, and the Southern Maryland Heritage Area before it became a national heritage area. And so even though she's not here physically with us tonight, I hope she's resting and watching this remotely, Lucille Walker, who is one of our favorite people here. And she's a big advocate for the work that Franklin Robinson, one of tonight's presenters, and his family do at Serenity. Tonight's documentary, Remembered by the Wind, was something that resonated with me deeply. It talks about a story of discovery and remembrance, how in 2012, a massive straight-line wind and thunderstorm roared across the United States from Iowa to the Chesapeake Bay, leaving a large stretch of destruction in its wake. On Serenity Farm, a former tobacco plantation in Benedict, the storm uprooted an enormous oak tree, leaving a massive hole. Now, if you're connected with Sotterley and familiar with our site in any way, you know that sinkholes and massive holes are not unheard of, but that they often unearth a treasure trove of history. And so after an admission by the farm's owner that a skull had been recovered that found where that fallen tree had happened, results in an archaeological and forensic quest by the family, a team of experts, and the African American community that results in a discovery unlike anything else. And it results in a community-wide effort to protect, preserve, interpret, and educate about those who lived and labored on that land over the course of centuries. Again, if you're familiar with Sotterley, this is what we do. This is the very heartbeat of what we do and who we are. And so Franklin is a longtime friend of mine, and he and I talk regularly. And when he talked about this documentary, I went, well, that's an easy yes for speaker series. And so I'm excited to introduce for all of you tonight's presenters. First off, Franklin. Franklin, you got to do your Miss America wave. Poor Franklin has had the pleasure, honor, distinction of being a longtime friend of mine. So he gets volunteered frequently. A lifelong member of St. Thomas Parish, Franklin has been the parish historian at the church since 1995. I'd like to highlight Exhibit A here, his book, Faith and Tobacco. As a historian and a resident of Southern Maryland, this book has been, for me, this is my third copy of it. The first one, somebody walked off with it. Don't ever take my books. The second one, I spilled coffee on, which is a hazard in my world. And this is my third. It is a researcher's dream, how one church, one historic parish can serve as a microcosm of our region's history. I'm just saying, I get inspired. Franklin is an archivist with the Smithsonian. He is also the chair of the Charles County Historic Preservation Commission. You have received numerous awards, too many for me to mention because I'd be here till the 32nd of February. That just doesn't happen. And Franklin is a contributor to the exhibits and archives and special collections libraries, publication by the Society of American Archivists. He has authored many finding aids, monographs, and of course, Faith and Tobacco. He's also a professional actor, playwright, and adjunct faculty at George Mason University. His family owns Serenity Farms in Charles County, which includes the St. Nicholas Creek Burial Ground. And at the heart of the Robinson family is a deep commitment to serving the community of Southern Maryland. Next up is one of my favorite people, Miss Dorothea Smith. Dorothea, how do you describe Dorothea? She's just amazing. She is what I call an educator's educator. She is a significant figure in the history of Charles County, known for her 30-year teaching career, her civic leadership, and continued community service. She is an inspiration to all who are blessed to know her. Her work includes her involvement with the African American Heritage Society of Charles County. That is a really long name. And she has been featured in prominent programs like Deep Roots and Many Branches, a documentary series highlighting the county's African American heritage that incorporates her personal stories of education and community building. She taught language arts at the middle school level, God bless you, for 3 decades, receiving prestigious honors such as the Charles County Teacher of the Year Award. After her retirement, which I don't believe because this woman does everything, Dorothea has remained active, serving on advisory boards for organizations throughout the region, including, again, the African American Heritage Society of Charles County. And her work and her research and her journey and insights into the county's notable African American schools have been shared in projects including the College of Southern Maryland's Instagram series highlighting the history. But again, how do you sum up Dorothea? Our newest speaker participating in the panel tonight is new to us. She is another Katheryn Barrett-Gaines, born and raised in Washington, D.C. She has an impressive background. She is a tenured full professor of Africa-centered history at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Way to go. She has a PhD that she earned from Stanford in African history and African American history and the comparative history of race. She has an MA in cultural anthropology from Duke. Again, very impressive. And she has won a competitive Fulbright Award to live and research in Uganda. She is a Rotary International Ambassador Scholar, multilingual as well, including in Swahili and some French. She was a stage and recording artist and a newspaper columnist, TV and radio host, and a management consultant for several companies. And she's published 2 books on the history of Uganda. She currently teaches courses at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore on various aspects of the histories of people of African descent, and she facilitates student interest in study abroad and coordinates the student internship program for the Maryland General Assembly. She, again, has one of those impressive backgrounds that I'd be here forever, but we are so grateful to have you here to participate in tonight's panel. And without further ado, I'd like to get started with our documentary.
In the summer of 2012, a massive storm with straight-line winds and thunder sped across the United States from the upper Midwest to the Chesapeake Bay area. In Charles County, wind speeds exceeded 70 miles per hour.
I could hear the storm outside, wind, rain, but by it being dark, there was no way to see just exactly how massive and how wild this wind was. My sister, Teresa, called me and said, the roof has been ripped off of the harvest house. At the same time, my sister had said that our tenant, one of our tenants, Sadie, who lived in a small house trailer down below the gamble roof barn, a giant oak tree that was down there had actually pinned her in the bathroom.
She called me screaming, hollering. It was like 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, and we ran down, and she was actually trapped in the bathroom area. The tree was on one side, and the door on the back side of the house had been jammed shut. So we had to break the wall through on the front side and then get over top of the tree to get her out.
Where this tree went down at the tenant house was very near where we had found a skull decades earlier, when they were digging a water line.
We had a trailer sitting there on that site for a tenant or someone that was helping on the farm, and the water line that was in there had either that or it needed replacing, and so we were in the process of digging a trench.
And we just came across it. It just came up with the backhoe. Yeah. So and then we didn't go any further at that point. We figured, well, we just put the water line right here.
So we had kept this skull. We took it and wrapped it very gently in a I believe it was a pillowcase, and kind of tucked it away because we didn't really know what to do with it. We didn't know who it was. Was it a British soldier? Was it African-American slave? Was it some of the Smith family that owned the farm once upon a time? We just didn't know, and we didn't know who to ask.
My involvement in this story began with a focus on Maryland 231, which is a highway that cuts up and down Charles County, and it's on the west side of the Patuxent River. And we were primarily interested in a War of 1812 encampment where several thousand British encamped there in August of 1814. And we were wondering, is there anything left of that? We were in the midst of the bicentennial celebration, so that's really what focused our interest in this particular location.
Now, where Serenity Farm was actually where the British Army of about 4,200 soldiers actually camped the night before they marched on Washington. So they unloaded their boats at Benedict, stayed here on the farm, camped out, marched to Washington, burned the White House as well as the Capitol, marched back, got on their boats, and went on to their ultimate defeat in Baltimore.
The first time we met Julie, she was working out on the state road, checking out there for, I guess, artifacts along the state road highway. And we had found this, the skull many years ago, and we got to know Julie, and we felt comfortable with her bringing it up and showing it to her.
I had chatted with Julie earlier, and I mean, we turn up artifacts on the farm all the time. Pipe stems, porcelain, nails.
As we began to do our surveys along the highway and time kind of went on, there was this gigantic storm that happened, and a large tree fell and left this gaping hole in the earth. And Franklin Robinson came to me and said, listen, I know you guys are in the area, and in the past we found this skull right next to where this tree fell. Could you come and take a look and see if there's anything there? And I said, sure. And I'll go ahead and take a look and see what's there. And what we did is we went ahead and I grabbed my crew and we looked in the hole, and it was gigantic, but there was no one in there. There wasn't evidence of bone. So it didn't mean that there wasn't more burials in the location. It's just that in that particular spot, nothing showed evidence of that. But we were still intrigued because here we had this skull, and I went ahead and took it to the Smithsonian, where Doug Owsley, who's a physical anthropologist, took a look at it and said, listen, this is an African-American male. And of course, our first reaction was, I wonder if it's part of a larger cemetery or burial ground. And how do we answer that question? And should we answer that question? How do we go about doing that? Who do we talk to about this?
So Julie, we had a telephone conversation, and I've worked a few cases with Julie and with Maryland State Highways, and she told me a story about a tree that fell down on a trailer, and a woman wasn't hurt, but when she went out to assess the damage, found a skull, and then she was looking for the battlefield and wound up on the top of the hill where the burial ground was. And it was a complicated story, but it sounded interesting. And if Julie's involved, I know it's interesting, and I signed up for it. I work closely with Baltimore County Police Department, which is where I used to work as a crime scene investigator. And in many of the cases that we've worked with Baltimore County, there have been partial remains that have been recovered, and they want a search team that is trained in forensics, that has experience with bone, that can identify bone, and someone who can distinguish human bone from animal bone, because anyone that's walked in the woods can imagine how many bones are out there. So with Baltimore County Police Department, we've worked, I would say, about 6 cases with them. And as far as I can recall, everyone has resulted in a recovery. And I also have worked closely with Detective Eve Grant.
So how I got involved with the Serenity Farm project was my best friend is the forensic anthropologist. Baltimore County Police Department and Towson University has a memorandum of understanding, so we work in conjunction with each other. So any skeletal remains I have, I can take to her lab, so I can work on them there, because obviously I don't have the ventilation and resources here. And she also works on the cases and puts her input as the forensic anthropologist. So we have this mutual relationship. Whenever I get involved with cases, she's always pulled over, and vice versa. If she's involved with cases such as Serenity Farm, it's, hey, I need you, can you come help? So we kind of work back and forth for each other for free.
With this particular burial ground, it was imperative. There really wasn't a choice. We had to reach out to the local African-American community, because whether or not we went forward with investigating this site was not our decision. It was theirs. These are their ancestors. And so the decision whether or not we move forward with that research on that project was up to them.
Well, I really didn't know exactly what she was talking about until we got here. And then I became very excited to be there, to see the beginning, the heavy machine scraping back the soil. That was very exciting.
Well, Ms. Webb proposed it to me because I was in Disney World. My husband called me down there and said, Ms. Webb wants you to come to the farm on Monday. I got back that Sunday. And that Monday, I met her at 9 o'clock down at the foot of the hill there. And she told me in archaeology, that was just something I said, oh. But when we got up here, and Julie, she's a beautiful person, because she's the one who really got us involved. And Ms. Webb gave me this packet that I had not seen before about all the information. But once we got here, and Julie told us all about it, and she asked Ms. Webb about it. And I can remember that man on the machinery. And his last name was Smith, because my last Smith, right, from Calvert County. And when he scooped that first little mound of dirt up, I said, this is interesting. And your dad told us about the skull and how for 20 years he had it. And I'm going to tell you what I said. I thought about that this morning. Why would you keep a skull for 20 years?
It was something that I wouldn't take and throw away, because it had meaning to it. It was just a matter of finding someone that could go into it deeper than just seeing a skull. So and therefore it didn't bother me about having the head up in the closet. He didn't bother me whatsoever. I mean, there's a room in the farm there, and so when the time came and we did find someone that could do all of that, why, I was glad that he was there and that I kept it.
You're talking about spirituality, that's divine, because it was meant to be put away for 20 years, and it was meant to come. 2012 was meant to be discovered, and Julie to be here.
Well, I was introduced to the African American Heritage Society by a guy by the name of William Diggs in 1980. I was introduced to him. And I met Mr. Diggs doing tours for different schools showing the artifacts.
In 1995, February 12th, Mr. William A. Diggs passed away. And he was the founder of the, one of the founders of the Afro-American Heritage Society. And Mrs. Webb used to be his companion because they didn't have any place to show the artifacts, so they would go out and call it was a traveling exhibit. And she searched and searched and kept the society going because a lot of the other founding members did not do that. So for 3 years, she kept it going. And I guess around 1998, I came on board along with two other people. She appointed Colonel Murray Board as president, appointed me as secretary, and I'm still secretary, and appointed Thelma Florence as treasurer, and she's still treasurer. Colonel Board now is ill, so Miss Webb is now acting president. And this house stands on 2.76 acres. And we didn't know any better because these folks were older, and they took us to the settlement in La Plata, June 29th, 1999. And we three little folks who were appointed to officers, we signed the paper. And I remember coming off the steps and saying, how are we going to pay for it? They said, we don't know. And that was the truth. But anyway, we had a 20-year mortgage. And 16 years later, December 17th, 2016, it was paid off. Our motto is without a struggle, there's no progress, by Frederick Douglass. And that is true. All right, so that's how we got Heritage House. This was given to us, handed down to us by Mr. William A. Diggs, and it was supposed to be the ball and chain and shackles that was used to keep his great-grandfather, William Jordan Sr., on the plantation because it was known that William Jordan Sr. would always run away. He was a habitual runaway. And it was said that during the last 20 years of his life that he had to be shackled. What's that right there? That's the whip. That's the whip. That just slashed him with. You know.
When I began to study and excavate archaeological sites associated with African American families and people, it's always a great joy because we're able to learn so much. And so little has been written down. Not everything's been remembered. There's been some recollections, but I think archaeology is a great tool to answer these questions that have gone unanswered for decades and for generations.
The farm has had, as you can imagine, a very long history. It actually is first mentioned in the journals of Captain John Smith when he came up the Patuxent River on his explorations. And he notes Native American villages here on the property down close to the Patuxent River. And then after that, European settlement comes in. The earliest sites that we found on the farm date to the 1640s, 1650s, which is very early in Maryland history. So for thousands of years, people have lived on this land. And of course, with European settlement, tobacco was the money crop and remained the money crop for generations after that. We were one of the largest producers of tobacco. We raised over 80 acres every year. Both my family raised tobacco as well as the tenant farms here on the farm. Tobacco is ingrained in the culture of Southern Maryland. And if you come from a tobacco farming family, it's part of who you are, because that dictated exactly what you were doing any day of your life, you know, as you were coming up, because that's your money crop. So when you got up in the morning, if it was a good day to go out and plant tobacco, you'd plant tobacco. If it was a good day to take it out of the barn, you took it out of the barn. It was the rhythm of life in Southern Maryland for many, many, many families and generations.
Since we knew the location of at least one of the graves, we decided to do a couple different things to locate and determine if it's a part of a larger burial ground. We use ground penetrating radar, GPR, and what that does is it sends radar waves through the soil and then bounces back with information to tell us whether or not there's something like a void or a difference in soil that may communicate to be something cultural. But sometimes it ends up being natural. So you always have to ground truth or dig into that anomaly, that strange type of reflection, to determine whether or not there's something there that is important to us. In this case, what we did is we took a backhoe, a smooth bucket, and began to scrape the topsoil inches at a time to try and find the grave shafts. The grave shafts for archaeologists are easy to see because you see this great rectangle, and then you can see the differences in the soil in that rectangle. So as archaeologists, we watch every time the backhoe would pull away a layer of soil, we'd watch for that stain to pop on up. And that's when we park the backhoe and we grab our trowels and our paintbrushes. And that's when the fine detail work really begins.
So it appears that the remains that were found at the site of the waterline and the downed tree were indeed the remains of the slaves that had been owned by the Smith family, that owned the farm during the time period that they dated the cemetery to, 1780 to 1810.
For a number of generations, the Smith family owned a large parcel of land along the Patuxent River, including what is now Serenity Farm. Charles Somerset Smith died in 1780, leaving the farm to his two sons.
One of the great tragedies of involuntary immigration, which was the transatlantic slave trade, was that people couldn't go back to be buried where they were born and where their ancestors were. Because that's, especially people who were born in Africa and then died in the Americas. Any African of any means who lives in another place, when he dies or she dies, they take them back to get buried where they were born. And so not being able to do that, of course, you've got to make a place where at least you're near your family and your children and whoever else is buried there. So it has all those elements of a very purposeful thing.
Each of the graves in the Serenity Farm Cemetery was assigned a number from 1 to 23. Charles Smith's inventory of 1781 provided the names of 25 enslaved African Americans living on the farm at the time of his death. However, no additional evidence exists to match the names in the inventory with the individuals buried in specific graves in the cemetery.
The large tree was over in this location, and the water line that had hit the other individual where the skull came up was right about in this location where burial 20 is located. Once we determined that we had 23 burials in the cemetery, we reached out to the African American Heritage Society and presented the results to them. And the big question was, do we excavate all of them? Do we excavate some of them? What sort of shape are the remains in?
She said that they were going to archaeology. You know, they were going to dig and they were going to look for remains. And so that's exactly what she told me. But before coming to the farm, I knew I was coming and I'd call Miss Smith to go with me, but didn't really know what I was coming into.
So a typical set of procedures is very atypical because no two sites are the same.
And so we decided to go ahead and as a group, sample each one of the burials because we had everyone from, infant sized to very old people to sort of adults. So we had all different sizes of shafts, which told us this was definitely a community. There were families, there were children, there were babies, and there were adults.
Julie and her crew determined that the 23 Serenity Farm grave occupants consisted of 7 adults, 10 children, and 6 infants. Dr. Dana Coleman, the forensic anthropologist on the project, began the process of documenting each of the graves excavated.
So we want to list all of the bones and all of the teeth that are present. And we use standard forms, documentation forms that deal with that. We also look at taphonomy, which is the overall preservation of the remains. So the individuals from Serenity Farm were buried in coffins. And coffins, even without presence of a coffin, we can look at the skeleton and tell if it was buried in a coffin. This one, for example, if you turn it over, it is black on the back. All of the bones have that dark staining on the back. That is consistent with an individual that has been in a coffin.
Another feature of the Serenity Farm burials was the use of vaulted grave shafts, a common practice in 19th century African American burials. In a vaulted grave, the shaft narrows toward the bottom, where a niche is dug for the coffin. Pine boards are then placed over the coffin to separate it from the dirt above. Pine board fragments uncovered at the Serenity Farm Cemetery would have likely covered a coffin in its niche, protecting it from direct contact with the soil above.
What was really interesting to me, but perhaps not shocking, was that these burials had almost no personal items. They were empty, except for a couple of them. One of them had waistcoat buttons. So you'd see the individual buttons more or less in the abdomen and upper chest area. Then on another man, we had a pants button. And those two individuals were the only ones that had anything that was any personal item, which is sometimes shocking because in African American sites and sometimes even burials, you'll find personal items that reflect their belief systems.
The other thing important about that question is that there's no such thing as African burial traditions because there's no such thing as one Africa. Africa is a huge place with many different kinds of people. And I mean, it's impossible to sum up African burial traditions, but we're talking about West Africa, West and Central Africa, because most people who came from Africa involuntarily during the 1600s and 1700s came from what we now would sort of call Angola and Gambia and Congo, because when people were captured in war and for various other reasons and sold, they often were walked long distances to the coast. So they weren't all just from the coast. But those traditions have things in common. And one is that in terms of death, people don't distinguish between life and death.
So we began with the excavation of all different sizes of burial shafts. And once we got in there, we realized that the infants or the preterm infants there was nothing left of them. They were completely decomposed. The only thing that survived were the nails, the fasteners for the coffins, and that was it. And so we excavated 2 of those and just left them. We no longer wanted to investigate the infant burials because we knew we wouldn't really be coming up with any data, and there's no reason to disturb them, especially since they weren't going to be moved from that excavation. So we then looked at some of the child-sized burials, and we got into children that were 6 years old all the way up to 13. And we noticed that the preservation there wasn't ideal either. You'd sometimes see some of the teeth or part of the jawbone, mandible, but besides that, they were pretty much gone as well.
The infant and child graves made up the largest number of burials at Serenity Farm. With the infant and child graves yielding limited remains, Julie and the team shifted their focus to the adults buried in the cemetery.
Burial 2 was a young, about 25 to 34-year-old African-American male, and his skeleton was incomplete, didn't have all of the bones, but was relatively complete. I think he was missing a couple of his ribs and some of the bones of the hands and the feet. He was a pretty rugose guy, meaning he was, was fairly well developed. He also had some evidence of disease. And the primary disease that we were able to identify was rickets. And rickets results from a vitamin D deficiency in childhood. And it's a pretty significant and prolonged vitamin D deficiency. And what will happen is that vitamin D, it promotes the absorption of calcium and phosphorus. And in the absence of calcium and phosphorus, the bones become demineralized. The result is deformity. And so Burial 2 had fairly significant deformity of his tibias around the knee area, his distal femora and his proximal tibias, giving him a very classic knock-kneed appearance. Given the deformity of his legs, to work in the field would have been incredibly difficult for him to get around.
What can I say? Gingerly, how the earth was removed and how precious they treated the remains, and especially the one that we saw, the full skeleton with and she told us about how they knew the rickets in the hips and whatnot. I still can see that. And about the children, and of course, there wasn't anything there because they went back to the dust.
Do you know where 13? Yes, 13. Yeah, I want to see 13. Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is a beautiful picture.
Yeah, that's real nice.
Yeah.
So burial 13, it came into the lab, as did all the other ones. It had some soil matrix associated with it. But burial 13, as I recall, was one of the more complete skulls that we had. And so we were very careful in the way that we removed the soil from that cranium. And as a matter of fact, as I started to remove it, and also keep in mind, there was a lot of root activity. And as you pull the roots, you pop off little pieces of bone. So I had cleaned burial 13's skull as best as I could. And I could see that there were some facial features. Most of the skulls that were in the Serenity Farms burial series did not have mid-faces, none whatsoever.
I'm Detective Evelyn Grant. I'm the Baltimore County Police Department forensic artist, and I'm also a detective with the Internal Affairs section with Baltimore County. So when I get a skull, the anthropologist will tell me whether it's black, white, Asian, all the statistics of the skull itself. From that, I use these tissue depth markers, and what these are just erasers, and they're individually cut and glued. There's 21 locations on the skull itself.
Realizing that potentially this was one that could be reconstructed, I called Detective Grant and I said, can you come over here? And her office is just a stone's throw from here. And she came over, and together we worked on it. We removed the soil. She took pictures throughout the process, and was here as his face was being exposed.
I could not physically glue these markers onto that skull because of its condition. It was falling apart as it was sitting there. So the normal process I took had to be altered. So I used a rod, which you stick in what's called the ear hole to line it up with the bottom of the eye socket. To the best of my ability, because I'm not using my crime lab now, it's me trying to take these photos in the lab at Towson University with Dr. Coleman. Took those photographs, and I had to do it instead of drawing by hand with paper, I had to convert it over to a computer where I can place these pins on it digitally, because I can't do it physically at this point. So this now became a digital drawing versus a charcoal or pencil drawing of what I normally do.
Grave number 20 was the original skull that popped up earlier. And when it came up, it was put aside, and then time went on, and we came back and delineated this particular grave by pulling the soil away. And what we found is the remains of this person, but he was facing in the completely opposite direction everybody else was.
So there could have been any number of reasons that there are people who say commit suicide, which is a transgression, and they need to be punished. And so, you know how Christians have this concept of purgatory? Well, that's a sort of a purgatory, to put someone through a very difficult thing in their transition to the ancestors, and maybe to keep them from being an ancestor. But it wouldn't have been an accident.
Now, there's a few theories about that perhaps he was ostracized by the community, that he was somehow different. We do know that one of the slaves owned by the Smith family had a supernumerary finger on each hand. So we don't know why he's different than the rest of them. We just don't know. But it's interesting that he indeed is the one that led us to this community. So whatever perceived sins that he may have done. Maybe this is his atonement.
Although Julie and the other project scientists would not speculate on who might occupy Grave 20, one wonders if this west-facing burial could be related to an escape by 2 slaves from the Smith plantation. On July 27, 1778, Charles Smith placed an advertisement in the Maryland Journal offering $200 for the return of 2 runaway slaves. The 2 men described in the advertisement were Moses and Abraham. The ad details the fact that Moses is remarkable in that he had a supernumerary finger on each hand and that he was an expert waterman. His companion, Abraham, is said to have carried off with him white-ribbed cotton breeches, a white shirt, and a linen waistcoat. The advertisement goes on to detail that the men were likely making for the eastern shore of the river and were accompanied by 2 other runaway slaves, one of whom was described as the wife of Moses. Both Moses and Abraham were returned to the Smith plantation as evidenced by the listing of their names in Charles Smith's inventory of 1781.
Well, I assumed that they would have been thinking about family. They'd been thinking about the hardships that they endure and that they're enduring. Also about the why, Lord? Why me? Why was I transitioned from my home to this place? And then also having to think about being obedient to the master. But I would think mostly from the couch of family. They're worried about their family. I'm pretty sure their children were out there at the time. And just hard labor, just the hardships. But like you say, why me, oh Lord?
If you imagine crossing the Atlantic in a boat, I can't even, that's not a comforting, it's not pleasant. The Atlantic is an ocean, it's gigantic. You disappear into nothingness for months. It's not peaceful. It's a terrifyingly turbulent thing. These boats were big, but not as big as like when we have these ocean liners now. So they felt the movement of the boat. They felt the storms. And then, of course, crowded into these boats, like not even like animals, more like cargo. And so, and with no facilities for human comfort. So, and no proper food. So people were getting sick, dying, and being thrown over, or getting sick and being thrown over before they died. And you have to remember also the terrific number of children involved in this. We often don't think about that. But there were lots of children, unaccompanied children, so terrified. So if you imagine the terror of people mixed with the misery of the conditions and just the general ill health, and also the just fear of what is going on and the inability to communicate, because these people were coming from all over West Africa. They weren't related to each other. They didn't share a language. So the inability to even understand what was going on. I mean, I just can't even imagine the trauma that could result from such a thing. So no, horrifying in every aspect, nothing good.
And frankly, I guess I'm thinking about the fact that when I taught school, I did take a group to National Theater, I think in Washington, and we actually did a for sale on the block auction. And the Caucasian student was the slave. And that Caucasian student, when he got back to John Hess Middle School, he said, "Miss Smith, I never felt like this before." So this is what I'm saying too, never. And I guess by reading, I've read so much about that, about how folks were sold, and like little children, and they sold them according to how well physically equipped they were, and never being able to know where your mother, your father, your children are and whatnot. It had to be on your mind all the time, especially when somebody of well-to-do came to the plantation. You knew that it was time for him to sell, or her to sell slaves, and they sold them for the money because they didn't have it, according to what I've read. So I don't think anybody else has ever experienced that. And I don't think the world understands. I know the Holocaust was terrible, but the world doesn't understand about slavery. Because even through the Holocaust, the Jewish people kept their identity and their history. We have none at all, really, in a sense. I don't know where they get my email from for the African American Heritage Society, but I get emails from all over asking things, and sometimes I don't know where to go, but I try to do the best I can. But I think this is one of the beginnings. And just think, you have this site on the farm here, and when young children come, and not only African Americans, all children can come and learn, because these young people are living in a different age than we came up in, and they're going to be a lot of different, because they don't see people as different as we did and whatnot. But it's a history lesson, and I'm just so glad that you have it here, Serenity Farm.
I think I want them to learn and to know that there's so much history that they need to research, do more research. Look into the history. It might be, who knows, some of their ancestors there.
In this project, it was very, very important for me to be able to reach out to the African American community. These are their ancestors, and it was important to also, and for me personally, to be along with them on this journey. The landowners, the Robinsons, the community, the archaeologists, we did everything that we could to make this a complete holistic project that included, when we opened up the burials, they were there to look upon them. When it was time to rebury these ancestors, we were together on this with them. And then at the very end, when we dedicated the cemetery with the individual stones and markers to remember the people who walked this land over 200 years ago, we were in this together. So it was very meaningful to the entire project team. And it was such a good feeling to be able to bring this piece of history to this community.
Are you happy with the fact that all the remains were put back where they were found?
Very happy. I feel that if I'd like to, I can come back. I like the idea of you having it in the paper so that anyone that reads it in the paper, because you're not going to their house and tell them. So if they read it in the paper and see, they have the opportunity to come if they want to.
So in thinking back on kind of where we are now, you have all of these parts coming together at one time. You have Julie and her crew working along 231. You have a major weather event that basically clears the site of this burial ground, so we can't use the house. You have the discovery of the skull 30 years prior. You have in place my family, which values education, knowledge, and the desire to know about the history of the property that they own. And you also have a set of people with Julie, my family, and eventually the African American Heritage Society that all want to know, what can these people teach us? So all of this has come together at this one time. Now, whether you believe in a universal power or not, I think it's quite fascinating that literally the stars aligned at this very time. And I like to think that these people, who now we don't know their names, but we know they're there, actually waited until all of this was in place, that it was safe to be known. And it gets you, because These folks have lain here for almost 200 years, over 200 years, and nobody knew them. Nobody. And finally, they decided, we want to be known. We want to be remembered.
Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to get the panel to come up here in the front. And Katheryn, actually, I might end up switching with you. I may let you come up here because I know the lead is going to be Franklin, but I'll let you come up here and facilitate. Then you have to Vanna White around and get the questions. People on the screen, do not disappoint me. Get at least one question. So when I'm going in the back, I get to hold my hand up so Katheryn calls on me. So give us just 1 second. Let's pull some chairs up here so we can get our panelists. But I do need to say we've got another rock star in here tonight. Miss Webb, who you saw on the screen tonight, is with us. She's phenomenal. Yay. Oh, so many famous people. So Miss Katheryn, here.
So let's get this started. Do we have any questions from the audience today?
Let's get them up here. I want you guys up front.
Yeah. Sorry, Franklin.
Thank you, Franklin. Katheryn, you want to come up here with us?
So while we're waiting, Franklin brought up a really good point. It's a good opportunity to visit the facilities and to get some more wine and snacks while we wait. Please eat and drink. Yeah.
Because a lot of my students are watching at the University of Maryland for sure. Hi. I'll see you Friday.
One's right here for you. And I think you see 3, and then I'll take the other. So, Miss Webb, you coming up too, sweetheart?
Yeah.
Yay!
Yay!
Franklin, here. This is for you.
I'm going to swap your microphone with that one.
Okay. Perfect.
And the other Katheryn.
Oh, come on up. We get more chairs. We love people up here.
You know what, Teresa? This is a good opportunity to ask him really annoying questions.
Nancy handed it to me.
You're going to do all the time.
You get to share.
2 mics. Can I sit next to you, Miss Webb? Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
It was so good to see you on the screen.
So Miss Dorothy, can you guys see Dorothea on the screen, or do I need to have her move to the other side so you can see her? Because Miss Dorothea is going to be seen.
Yes, we do. No,
Miss Dorothea, you come over here by Franklin. You got to keep him in line anyway.
Here's why it's important. My students have an assignment, and one of the assignments is to choose to talk about what you particularly are talking about. So they need to know that's Miss Smith.
Okay, so we are going to get started. Miss Katheryn, you can go ahead and herd the cats, and let's get this wonderful conversation going.
All right. Mr. Johnny has a question.
As I understood it, that this graveyard is specific to the Smith family. Did it just stop at this point, or did other family come in and also had slaves? Are there any more slaves that you?
Is this on? Yeah, there we go. Okay, very interesting, actually. Good question. So, yes, the Smith family actually lived there for quite a few generations. They owned it at least for 3 generations. And the Charles Somerset Smith that placed the ad had 2 sons, Henry Arundel Smith and Charles Somerset Smith III. So when Charles Somerset Smith Jr. passed, he divided the farm into 2 sides. There, he gave the part that is now Serenity Farm to his son, Henry Arundel Smith, and the other side
he gave to his son, Charles Somerset Smith III. And the creek that divides them was at that time called the St. Nicholas Creek. And so it's really interesting because the dates of the burial ground exactly go with the ownership of Henry Arundel Smith. They start in it's actually 1790. We were a little bit early in our estimation there. 1790 to 1810, and that's when Henry Arundel Smith passed in 1810. And then that burial ground stops being used. So what happened? Did everybody go to the other side, or there's no record of sale? His wife was still living, and his wife, DeCandia Ireland Smith, actually married Clement Dorsey and is buried at Summerseat Farm. So see, it's all connected. But yes, that would have been right with the Smith family. And then Clement Dorsey bought the farm from Charles Somerset Smith III, and they owned it until after the War of 1812, and then it was bought by the Morton family. But all of these people were very wealthy and would have had enslaved, but we have never found another burial ground. So we know I'm sure there's something there. It's just finding it.
Well, that's the thing. There's people everywhere. I mean, think about it. I mean, the number of graveyards you see on a daily basis is nothing compared to the number of people who have been deceased on this land over the past 10,000 years. People are everywhere. So when do we find them? We talk about, you and I have talked about this before, that developers don't always stop excavating when they find skulls. They sometimes, now they're not as responsible as this family was. They keep going and they keep it quiet. They don't call Julie Shablisky. So people are everywhere.
Any other questions?
We do have some online too when you have a chance, Katheryn.
Mary.
I'm not sure to whom I direct this. So you just mentioned Julie again. I was fascinated when I saw her title being with the Highway Administration. Right. So how did she get involved? And that really caught me right at the beginning.
That's amazing.
Oh, okay. Interesting question. So the Maryland Department of Highways, or whatever it is, State Highway Administration, actually is involved in tourism. I know, sounds like crazy, but you got to get on a road to go somewhere, right? So I guess that's the way they justify it. But that is why she is with the Department of Transportation, and she runs that shop. She's been elevated now. I can't remember what her title is, but and the rule is that if you are within so much distance of a state highway, they can come in and do the work, but like they couldn't come into something that was remote. So there has to be a connection to the highway system. And yeah, so that's it. But you all probably have seen her on Outdoors Maryland a few times because they just discovered the home of Harriet Tubman's father on the Eastern Shore. So, and she's done so much else since the burial ground at the farm, and still very involved on it. She lives on the Eastern Shore now. So, yeah.
But it's such an interesting idea because it is sound funny, highway. But all of us have been on, just even coming here. How many historic signs do you see on the highway? I mean, this is where we advertise. This is where we put our history. We put our history on the highway.
I think it's required by the state to do an archaeological study before any roads are put in. Oh, okay. I think it's required that by the state that archaeological studies are done before any road construction is done. And Julie, I don't remember her last name, but I've seen her on Outdoors Maryland, in Western Maryland, throughout the state.
Yeah.
She's a regular on that MPT show. So
she's a rock star.
Oh no, I was going to say that I've done, the African American Heritage Society has done other work with Julie, I think 2022. It's good to know people, but it is. But at the State Highway Administration, there's a cultural resource department, and Julie was in charge of that. So it has a lot to do with that also. I learned a lot. Plus, I like archaeology now. I didn't know, I didn't know too much, but because I've been on digs with Julie since then and whatnot.
But yeah, she's in charge of that cultural resource.
But it's cool to see what you can do with an what archaeologists do. They do more than we maybe thought.
Nancy?
So we do have a couple of questions online, and I'm going to combine a couple of them first because somebody was asking, were facial recognition drawings made of any other individuals recovered, but also was any genetic testing done?
Okay, so unfortunately, as Dana explained in the documentary, there's the camera. There were no other skulls that were still intact enough to do any reconstruction. So number 13 is the only one that we have. As our hope had been that there would be intact DNA to link these people to current communities. Unfortunately, Southern Maryland has some of the worst soil for preservation, and there was no recoverable DNA to be able to go very far. So they were able to discern male, female, infant, of course, child, and the gender. But beyond that, it was just not. And they could actually do isotope analysis. So they know kind of the diet, of course, was heavy on corn, as American diets are, shellfish and that sort of thing. And of course, they talked about the rickets. And so they were able to do that. And the other thing to know is that they do know through the isotope analysis that all of these were what we would call county born. So they had not come across the Atlantic. Their ancestors certainly had, but these folks had not. So hope that answers your question. Did you want to say something?
But, interesting, that question, is, do you think there would, who knew 20 years ago, people didn't know what DNA could do. So is it possible that sometime in the future, some of this stuff that's under there could actually be traceable? And in that case, would people want then to re-dig?
Could be.
In a place where people have been disturbed and then it's an interesting, there's a lot of questions.
Well, science is always advancing. And so, yeah, that's a great question. And so everybody was put back where they were found, bones and everything. And of course, they had the samples that they used for isotope analysis, which could be used again. So.
And so to double, because you've made this point clear, that woman who's sitting in the lab talking next to a skeleton, that's not from Serenity. That skeleton is not from Serenity Farm. People have wondered why she's sitting there talking next to a skeleton, pulling up bones. I don't know who that is, but it's not one of these people.
It was probably, as Eve Grant was saying, it probably was from the forensic studies that they do, and people do donate their remains and so on and so forth. But it is not. Yeah, I'm glad you brought
that scene shocks people sometimes when they go, what's happening there? Who is that? And why is she just handling him?
Nancy, did you have?
We did have another one here. Now, I know your beautiful property, Franklin. It's a gorgeous location. If you haven't been there, you've seen it, but you haven't known it if you've gone over the 231 bridge. Right. But I know we're talking about the Davis family and where the Smith and where they owned the owning family when this enslavement had happened. They said, what is the burial ground in relation to the structures on the plantation? And do you even know that piece?
No, that is the piece we would love to know. And Julie and her team did look to try to find quarters or that sort of thing. But it's interesting how we have not found any building remains that date to that era. We do know that in Charles's will, when he wills this property to his son, Henry, that he says the property to the south of St. Nicholas Creek on which I have built my new house. Now, bless his heart, he didn't tell us it was on the peak or somewhere over here, So sad to say, all of the buildings that we have on the farm now date to the late 19th century, early 20th, and on into, I think the last barn we built was what, Teresa, 1983? Yeah, we built a tobacco barn then. So it's a fairly modern farmscape.
Any questions from anybody here in the audience tonight?
One in the back, Katheryn.
Good evening, and thank you. That was it's been
A
so
little closer to your mouth,
interesting.
please, so they can all hear you.
Okay. So I was perhaps naive to be surprised that the bodies were found in coffins, that they were paid the respect of being buried in a coffin, and also the evidence that they were clothed. And the buttons in particular, those are valuable. Can you talk about what lives they might have had? Thank you.
Well, I think that's the thing. And I think that's what was so interesting, what Julie was saying in the film and you were saying, is that the only clues we have about them is that, and like Julie was shocked to see that there wasn't more stuff, more material, cultural things. But, you know, they were probably buried by each other. I mean, this is not like the master did this, right? They would be building their own, this is their own thing. And so the coffins and caskets, I think is the word we would, and the burials and the ceremonies, all that stuff would be their own. And what's interesting is we often think that, everybody's life as an enslaved person was the same, and it was, is what we picture on the cotton fields in Alabama. And, you know, we just sort of picture everybody being like that. But the life of enslaved people is as varied as the people who were enslaved and what they could manage for themselves. One of the ways to figure out how people lived enslaved is to look at the laws that were passed against the things they could do while enslaved. And when you find a place like in Maryland where there were laws against enslaved people running their own businesses, well, what does that tell you? People were running their own businesses. I mean, when you have laws against enslaved people buying and selling livestock, because they were. And so that shows you there's a lot of activity among people who are enslaved with each other on various places. These places, these farms or plantations are all close together. And there were so many more enslaved people than there were unenslaved people. And they had their life going. This is why they were, quote, running away. As you point out in the film, Ms. Smith, they were going to see their relatives, going to see their wife, going to see their children. There's a whole life going on that is largely unseen by the white people who really didn't know what was going on necessarily. And so what they were wearing could have been what they themselves were managed to get as a result of their own activities. And so we have this idea that, and also remember, this is what years now?
1790 to 1810.
This is, people covered up. No matter what color you were dressed, right? You didn't walk around naked in the 1700s. I don't care who you were. And so now maybe, children of course have less than others, but it depends on what your mother could get, which depends on what your grandmother could do. It depends on who knew how to sew. It depends on it's just so interesting to see this kind of stuff because it complicates our simple vision, our simple ideas. It's very important to complicate the simplicity of what we think about enslavement. These were human beings, and they did what all human beings do, which is what they could under conditions that they didn't choose. So it's just so interesting for us, and that's what was so striking about the reconstruction of the face, because you see bones, okay, but then when you see a human emerge with a face and eyes, like, okay, yeah, we're talking about people. We're talking about millions of people, and millions of people live as millions of people live anywhere. They're all individuals. So it's just so beautiful to see.
So as always, I forgot something. I was going to we have a picture. You remember the face that came to you finally? We have a picture of that. And as always, I walk right out of the house. I was going to bring it. We have the smaller one of his face, and then we have the full, where he would have been an indentured servant. And Ms. Webb, when we saw the first draft of the film, I was a trustee at the College of Southern Maryland, and we had a room over there. And I remember when Julie showed us the face and whatnot, Ms. Webb, and like I said, I had it right in my bag. We have those pictures at Heritage House. And when she saw the face, she said, hold that back up again, please. She said, Joey, because Mrs. Webb babysat, or she was the mother to twins Nigerian twins. Their parents were from Nigeria. And Joey looks just like that and whatnot. So we knew part of that. But what I was going to say is, this was 2012. Well, in 2000, 2002, I think in 2003, I was fortunate enough to go to West Africa. And I went to Ghana and I went to Senegal. And I was fortunate to go to the two castles, the slave castles, Elmina and Cape Coast. And we left at 7 a.m. in the morning and we finished at 7 p.m. When you walk the floor of where the Africans were kept, the dungeons, when you walk that floor and they tell you that you're walking the floor where the enslaved to be in America were kept, and then you go up and they open the door called door of no return because you're not returning, and you stand there and your pictures are taken, and when you get back home and you see your face, it's an expression that I have a picture of that you can't explain. And then you're told by, I know the first time I went in 2000 was 13 days and whatnot because we went further up north country. But you're told by two of your young guides that much is expected of you because you are the descendants of the 20% who made it, the passage, because most of them didn't make it. And like I said, it's hard to explain because I know some of the individuals in the society had been to Africa, West Africa. And when I first started, I was going, I said, tell me about it. And they said, no, I'll let you explain it. But like I said, when you walk on that floor and you come to that door where they were dropped over into the ships, it's just something else. So like Ms. Webb said, research, no, you need to travel, and whatnot.
Yeah, and what people who study this are learning that more and more that concerning Maryland is huge. Maryland was just full of slave importers. I mean, and their names, Ogle and Tasker and Bowie and, all these guys, and what was amazing is that slavery got so hot and so lucrative that people were sending small boats to get 15 people, small boats, like a boat you would see docked at Annapolis today, over to Africa because that was how valuable people were, men especially and women. But they were eventually, when it became illegal, not when it ended, but when it became illegal in 1809 to import human beings, it still went on, and they were mostly bringing children, babies, and in these tiny boats that we would see, because we picture the big giant ships, some of these people were being brought in these tiny boats because they were being smuggled. So it's an amazing history that is it just went on much longer than we think and in much more insidious ways. And you said it so well in the film, never been seen in human history. You can study slavery all over the world, and it has been practiced all over the world, including right here by Native Americans on this land, but not anyway like what we managed to pull off in this transatlantic thing. Nobody has ever done anything like that.
And to go along with that, Sotterley is a UNESCO site of memory for routes of enslaved people. We have a direct connection with the history of the transatlantic slave trade here at Sotterley. We were one of those sites.
So I want to loop back to the clothing for just a second because so two graves actually had remains of clothing, and that was the one with the waistcoat and the breeches and all of that. And that's what came out in the advertisement looking for Abraham and Moses. But can we say that that is Abraham or Moses, whoever had those clothing? We don't know. We don't know. I always make that, but it's interesting how that matches up with exactly the way he was described when he left. And then, of course, the pants button was from grave 20, if I remember correctly. But probably the others were buried in shrouds because they found shroud pins. They would wrap you in a cloth and then pin it, and it would go in the casket. But just a little window into kind of how things probably hadn't changed that much by the early 20th century. In my grandfather's farm diary, he notes on one day that, and I cannot remember the gentleman's name, it was either Joseph Oy or Norris or somebody, had taken off to make a coffin for Annie's baby. So that was like 1920s. So that's just a little window, like I'm sure that happened 200 years prior, that people would say, hey, I need to go bury my child, or, whoever. So
I'm not going to tell all of this story, but when Franklin was saying something about, it's time, there's a time and a place for everything. I'm thinking about ecclesiastical. But Mr. Robinson Sr., when we were down there, I told Mr. Robinson Sr., I said, Mr. Robinson Sr., I said, I used to come to this farm. Now, I'm not going to tell him the whole story. I said, I used to come to this farm. And he said, yeah. I said, yeah. I said, I taught at John Hanson Middle School. And there was a science teacher from Hagerstown, Maryland, and we called her C. Smith, and I was D. Smith. And I said, on Friday nights, I said, C. Smith rented a house up on the hill. And on Friday nights, I won't tell you what we did because teachers are not supposed to do anything. And I said, we would come down on Friday night and we would sit up on that porch and we would have a good time and whatnot. And nobody knew we were there. And I said, then there was a math teacher. I cannot remember her name. Joanne, yeah, Joanne. And Hornbaker, yeah. And I said, she would come to school at John Hanson Middle School and she would say, my husband is a shepherd. Well, I'm thinking about the biblical term shepherd. I said, a shepherd? And she said, we live on Serenity Farm. But he was a shepherd of the sheep here and whatnot. And Joanne was a math teacher and she had 9 children. Yes. And C. Smith was the godmother to all of them. But I told him that, he said, what? I said, I think that was in the 70s. Because I taught at John Hanson Middle School beginning in 1973. But who would have thought that I would be back here? And I didn't know him. We didn't know anybody on the farm. We were sneaking on the farm and whatnot. And teachers do sneak. Now we did then. We had to do then, because we were put up on pedestals. And I said, who would have thought that I would be back on the farm in 2012 on a project like this? And I'm going to tell you, when we saw the skeleton in the grave, that was the one who was supposed to have rickets. That was something else. And like I said, I do remember, I said Smith, but I think that man was named Mr. Mako, who did the first scoop from Calvert County. Yes. Yeah, and whatnot. But anyway, interesting time. Sometimes you have to wait for things.
Did we have more online? Because I know
you guys are so popular. You have no idea. We're probably not going to be able to get to all of them, actually. But one of the questions I think comes from you talking about the fact that, of course, there are so many remains that we don't know where people were buried. And they said, could the enslaved be buried in a local church burial ground? Was there a cultural shift in burial practices? And I know that has changed so much over time, but let's throw that one out first.
The thing that we have to remember is that there were laws against enslaved gathering. So I just remember.
Which tells you they were gathering.
Yeah. So I'll just tell you, and I'll try to make this story short. There was a developer that was developing a piece of property, and I brought up the fact that, look, this person here who had owned this property owned X number of enslaved. They've got to be here somewhere. Talked to them about where we found ours, and he's like, oh no, they would have gone to the churches we're on. And I showed him. I said, if you will see, none of these African-American congregations had property and built a church until the 1870s. I said, that is after freedom. So to answer the question, I won't say it didn't happen, but in the church records that I have found, most of them, and I would dare not say all because I'll be proved wrong, the preacher would go to the plantation and consecrate the grave. And now I'm an Episcopalian, so I'm talking about the Episcopal Church. But there is evidence that they would go every so often, and so had passed. So they would go to wherever the burial ground was, consecrate that grave, bless it. So most of them, like I said, were buried on the property on which they lived. Do you want to?
And I'm getting ready to prove them wrong.
Oh, good.
No, but that's exactly your point. The question is exactly right. It depended. And so let me give you an example in my neighborhood. I live in Bowie, Maryland, Prince George's County. And the Jesuits, this is ground zero for the Jesuits, major slave owning organization, the Jesuits of the Catholic Church, a huge slave owning organization. And they're coming to terms with it. They're giving free tuition at Georgetown for the descendants. But there's a church, Holy Trinity. No, the one right in Bowie, Holy Trinity. Yes, that White Marsh. No, The Jesuits. No, the Jesuits, the Catholic Church right there in White Marsh. And this is where, at this church, which is still standing on this hill, that's where they made their decisions about what they were going to do and how they were going to survive in North America and who they were going to sell in order to open Georgetown University and Gonzaga High School and all, you know, who they were going to sell to Louisiana. And that's a story that's become huge. And, but you can see it in my neighborhood. So you drive, you can drive up and down 450 all day, and then we start seeing, because now people like you have been doing this. And so they have been excavating their graveyard. Mm-hmm. And so as you drive up and down on your way to work every day, you start seeing clearing, because the gravestones are there for the white people. Start seeing these bushes all cleared, and then you start seeing orange flags all up and down the hillside, hundreds of orange flags. These were unmarked graves of non-white people. These are unmarked graves of enslaved people. And it just, every time, it's just, you see that. Because people are starting to come to terms, people are starting to put money into, and this is, Catholic University is part of this, you know, the archaeologists there, but you see these orange, and each of those orange markers is a human being's resting place. But goodness knows how many more. I mean, that's one hillside covered with trees. And like, I think about your farm and the places where the trees are now. Who knows what used to be under where those trees are now?
Well, if you've been reading the Washington Post for the last couple days about the cemetery near the Cheltenham Youth Facility, used to be the, yes. So, there, if you ever get the chance to go and visit those, hopefully they're going to do something about it. It's exactly like where we found ours, right in the edge of the woods on sort of the top of the ravine. Some of them have stones, some of them do not. So, but anyway, I hope that answered the question. So.
Yes, it did.
Same with the Crownsville Hospital in Crownsville, where this wonderful woman who was involved with this too, by herself, like you guys did, without any help, found the unmarked graves across the road from that they were getting ready to mow down. And these were people who were criminally insane. So even their families didn't want those graves marked and didn't want their names on those graves. So it's a very difficult situation there, but people are everywhere.
But then, like you were saying, I know I'm from Anne Arundel County, and where my family is buried is the Moses Cemetery. And it made me go back and research some of that. And like you said, in Montgomery County, some parking lots over top of the cemeteries and whatnot. And I was thinking about when you said about Cheltenham, I looked at that at the news yesterday. And that was really what we used to call Boys Village. That's right. Yeah, you're right.
So there's another question here from one of our descendants, Agnes Lightfoot is on, and she was asking about Mr. Diggs, who was mentioned, and if his family was descended from the plantation. But I'd like to kind of piggyback on, and maybe Miss Webb and Dorothea, you guys can address, you know, you've got remains here, and how do you handle them? Are you going to dig them up? I know there was Franklin, you handled this so beautifully to get the buy-in. But so I'd like, you know, with Mr. Diggs, was he connected? Were his ancestors connected? That's a question coming from our descendant. But how was this vetted? So you decided, are we going to dig at all? And how are we going to handle this?
Ask that again, because I don't understand what you're saying.
So, you know, when we've got sites here that we think we may have buried enslaved.
Right.
So the question of to dig or not to dig, do you even go there? And if you find the remains, do you leave them? Do you do something else? There's so many cultural questions to answer when you're looking at grave sites that you've uncovered, which you didn't know about before. And I know, Franklin, you went into the community and you got feedback. You got buy-in on this.
So let me tell you one of my favorite stories about Miss Webb. Miss Webb, I'm going to talk about you now. So they came down to the farm because we wanted to show them exactly what we had minds of doing. And so I think either Julie or myself, probably Julie, just posed the question, do you want us to go forward with this? And Miss Webb said, if there's something to learn, I want to learn it. I mean, there you are. There's the button on the shirt. So we went forward. So, yeah, I don't know.
Well, no, well, you know, I'll tell you where I was. in Disney World, and coming back that Monday, and she said meet me at 9 a.m. and another young lady named Jeanette. She's resting now, but she came too. But I had no problem because I was just a secretary anyway, so I did whatever she told me to do. Since I retired from teaching in 1995, I've been doing that ever since. But you know, it was spiritual, it was divine, it was so interesting, and I want to say this. I give him all the credit in the world. Yeah. Yes, I do, because in Charles County, I know I shouldn't say this, but it's rather hard to unearth the African-American history, the Black history in Charles County. And he was the first. That's why when he said, will you come down here tonight? I said, yes. I didn't even know what it was all about. I called him today. I texted him today. I said, what are we doing? But anyway, and it led us to Franklin, in partnership with Franklin. But it was just a beautiful thing. And I mean, the service, it's Episcopalian. I'm Methodist inside, but I'm Catholic on the top. Because my husband is Catholic, and I had to become Catholic in a way. We did a ceremony because that's what I had to. I had a program. See, I left everything at home. But anyway, we did a ceremony, very religious, Episcopalian style and whatnot. And it was just beautiful. And really, 2012 it started. 2019 is when we went to Greenbelt to see the first viewing of it. The Greenbelt Theater, which was also interesting too, because, you know, as an African American, we never went to the right in Greenbelt. We went to the left. So when my husband drove up there, we went to the left. I said, hey, this is not the place. I said, let's try the right. I said, oh, that's the Greenbelt that we weren't to go to. But anyway, we went into the theater, and I have to say this. We weren't even thinking about the filming. We went into the theater, and Miss Webb and I were together, and we saw the prices up there. That was like 50 cents for the ice cream and the popcorn. And Miss Webb said, oh, we're going to get that. I said, yeah. And here come these people. I have to tell you this because we were just floored. They said, oh, here come the stars. And we looked around. And we said, stars of what? But we had no idea that when we walked into the theater that there would be about 100 people. Yeah. They were even from Williamsburg, Virginia. They were that interested. And it was just, and Julie was there. And like I said, Julie Sablinska is one of the best people that we have met, because as a result of her in Charles County, we have now unearthed some African-American history with a man named Joseph C. Parks, who was the supervisor of colored schools for 41 years. And he founded 35 elementary schools and 2 high schools and whatnot. So, and Julie got us a marker, and the state highway wanted a marker beside a historical site. So we said, hey, we can put one over in Bryan's Road where Mr. Joseph C. Parks lived, and it's right down the road. And his daughter just passed away this year and whatnot. So State Highway Administration, great place. But anyway.
Yay, government.
I have a question. I know people have come together and supported I know people have come together and supported the creation of this newly found site, but how do you manage to fund the maintenance, the continuing maintenance? I can see that would be a difficulty.
Okay, yeah. Well, my family, myself, I have 3. I was hoping that some of our volunteers would be here this evening. I have 3 volunteers that take on the mowing and stuff for us. And I have 1 volunteer recently helping the Conservancy, and she's working up how to do the tours and that sort of thing. But it's all volunteer, and you know, we feel very strongly that if somebody's coming to see the burial ground, we're not charging them. So you know, if you want to give a donation, that's great, but it's not there to make money. So yeah, it's just sweat, you know, and hopefully we'll keep getting.
Yeah, without struggle, there is no progress.
There you go. Yeah. So.
And I made a mistake in the film. We paid for the house December the 17th, 2015. No, I say that.
That's very impressive.
And I say that, and I used to tell my students just to be very careful how you deal with people, how you treat people as you go along the highway, because you don't know who's going to do something for you. And I want to say this, a lady This lady here would be 101 October the 8th. But and she's always active. Of all the members who attend our meetings, I can call her and say, Miss Webb. She said, what time? When are you going to pick me up? But anyway, I forgot what I was going to say.
Talk about buying the house.
Oh, buying the house, yeah. Oh, no, I was going to say, we had another young lady. She wanted to live to be 100. She died February, right after her birthday. She was 99. She's the lady who gave me the last payment. She was a member of the society, and she knew Mr. Diggs and all. Last payment for the house, and I'm not going to tell you how much it was, but it was 4 digits. Okay, so like I said, you have to be careful how you treat people. But this young lady here and the other young lady, they were the backbone. We used to take them to the meetings, and they sit in the back of the car, and I was secretary. And Mary Colonel Board was the president, and I would be so angry sometimes. I'd be saying, and they said, we got your back. I said, what back do you have? And believe it, later on, I knew what they meant when they had my back, because they had the back, the society.
Now, this gentleman, you had a question before. I don't want, okay, you all right? No? Okay.
So I know we probably do need to wrap it up. I did have one more question, unless somebody in the audience has a question right now. And I'm not going to get to everybody online, so I really apologize. But for those who are online or in the room, remember we'll have a recording of this because you're going to want to remember everything, and you're going to say, I can't remember what they said. Have no fear. You guys are immortalized and will be a teaching tool forever. Right. But with so much notice that you brought to this project, Franklin, have any oral histories? And I think because of the time period, the answer may be no. But the question online was, were any oral histories ever come to light that might shed more on the life of the enslaved who you found on your property?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, of course, folks know about it now, and the hope is that, people would come forward and say, oh, hey, my family lived on the farm from this. And people have done that, but it's mostly, like I said, late 19th century, early 20th on into people that we knew that lived on the farm. So, but seriously, when I say that in the film, nobody knew. Like when my grandparents purchased this farm in 1965, nobody said, oh, by the way, there's a burial ground down there. It had totally gone out of anybody's memory. And it's indicative of what Katheryn has brought up. How many of these places do we not know about? And one more other thing is that this film is available on YouTube as well as Vimeo, and it's free. So anytime you want to watch it. My students are watching it now. There you go. She's watching you. Yeah. The other I want to tell one more story, and then I'll. So one of the things that they found in the infant graves was a fish scale. Now think about how small that is, right? And modern science was able to tell us that was a scale from a white perch caught in the Patuxent River. So with me coming from my theater background, you start to spin, how did that fit? What is that fish scale? How did that get there? That is here 200 and some odd years later to tell us a little bit of a story about this child. Was it its last meal? Was the mother cleaning fish and had to go bury her child? Where did that fish scale come from? But it tells us a little part of the story, and that's what archaeology and history and research is all about, putting it back together to create the story of people that have gone before us. That's right. Yeah.
That is so beautifully said, Franklin. And you gave flesh and bone to people who had been long forgotten. And I think it's just incredible what you and your beautiful family have done to make sure that these people's lives are honored. And to all of you who are part of this project, part of this film, we thank you for being part and raising these up. And I think this deserves a huge round of applause, everybody, truly.
And there are rack cards about the burial ground on the table. And I didn't bring a lot, but we do have a study guide that was produced that has some about the burial ground, the farm, and the Benedict area. So please help yourself. If you don't get one, either come to the farm, send us a letter, and we'll mail you one.
Can I tell you the hilarious story of how I met Frank?
Please do that.
So I'm an actor too. So we were in, he did a play, he wrote a play, and I'm in the play. And I thought he was crazy because we were standing on the stage and he goes, "Oh, you're a historian?" And then he launches into this crazy story about a hole, and just like the lady was saying, in the skull. And I'm like, what? And it just, I'm here to do, I think it was a Christmas Carol, and he's just, it was the crazy. I thought, this guy is either a lunatic. But then we went to this farm, and sure enough, I'm like, dude, he's real. So that was,
But that's why I say, believe in the universe. It will bring whatever you need.
And as a professional historian, this is a real historian right here. That's a real historian.
Absolutely. And I'm not joking about you coming back to do that book sometime. Oh, yes. I want everybody to hear your beautiful words, so you just need to give me a second. I will run back to you. Just a second. Here we go.
Hello. Franklin, in honor of the cemetery, could you just speak about greening of the graves? Because that is also very humbling, and it's a very nice event and free.
Yes.
And it is a teaching event.
So, yeah, I promise we're going to let you all get out of here. So December the 7th, from 1 to 3 at the farm, as part of the Charles County Holiday Trail, we do what is called greening of the burial ground. It is the last event we do in the year. And come to the Harvest House. We have greens, pine, cedar, holly. You make a swag, make a wreath, whatever. It does not have to be fancy. Then we all go down to the burial ground. Everybody places something on each one of the graves. And then I give you a little bit of the history, and I do what I call remembering the names. Stand around in a circle, and we call the names that we know of people that may or may not be buried there. So please come out and join us.
That's amazing. Just amazing.
Excuse me. Do you want to ask your question? Are you going to ask him? Not out in the public. You want to ask him private? Okay. She talked to me last night, but I'm calling one of my members from Lusby on the carpet there. But okay, you'll ask him privately. And she's not going to ask you for a date either. But go ahead.
Well, I think this was an incredible evening. Katheryn, we've got two. You want to mention our next virtual speaker series? Make sure to come over here. Come over here so they can see your face. We have our next speaker series, which is going to be virtual, and then November 1st. If you could mention both of those events.
So join us in October for a virtual speaker series with Jonathan Cavalier, who is the head of the gardens for Dumbarton Oaks. He's going to be speaking about landscape designer Beatrix Ferrand, who was a friend to Herbert and Louisa Sotterley, who owned this Sotterley right here during the early 20th century. This is going to be dedicated to our Duke of Dirt, Bob Aldridge, who passed away earlier this year. And this was this is what gets me every time. He said, I'll have a front row seat to that. I think he's going to have the best seat in the house. We also have on the 30th, the Descendant Portrait Project will have an exhibit at the Boyden Gallery. It's at 7 to 9. I can't read from that far away. And at the Boyden Gallery at St. Mary's College, it's going to start at 4:45 and go to 6 p.m. We are also having a big event November 1st. It is a kind of a collaborative effort here. It is Maryland Humanities picks a book every year for their One Maryland, One Book initiative, which is to encourage literacy and reading in our state. This year's book, Kin.
Don't steal my book.
That's correct.
I think I quoted you.
And Kin is basically a series of prose, poetry, and illustrations by a mother and son duo who uncover their family connection to a plantation on Maryland's eastern shore. Well, our event is November 1st that honors this book. November 1st is also a historically significant date in Maryland. It is Emancipation Day. So 9 to 5, we will be having an event right here in the barn. There will be registration available online shortly, and we hope that you will join us.
So let's give another round of applause for this incredible panel, and to Franklin for making all of it possible, and your beautiful family. Thank you so much for making all of this possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you weren't here tonight to join us in person. We're glad you joined us online. Thank you so much, and we will see you next month.
So we have a professor at UMES whose last name is Satterley.